Ah, for just one time, I would take the Northwest Passage to find the hand of Franklin reaching for the Beaufort Sea, tracing one warm line through a land so wide and savage, and make a Northwest Passage to the sea.
Welcome to Book Time with Ryan. I am Ryan, and today I'll be talking about Erebus by Michael Palin. Erebus, the story of a ship. There it is. That's an illustration. We're talking about a story. I am wearing a Christmas gift I asked for, and it is a Harris tweed jacket. It's very fancy. From Scotland. So, why? Well, I wanted to dress up. Sammy's here. I wanted to dress up, but also Sammy's here. So if you hear any kind of, there she is. She's chewing on something. It's a toy. It's a dog toy. It's a dog toy. When you see it, just know it's a dog toy. It was purchased at a dog store. Okay? Pet store. At a pet store. This book is from 2018. It covers Erebus, a bomb ship from the 1840s, 1830s, 1820s maybe. I think it was 1820s that it was commissioned. What is a bomb ship? It was a ship that didn't really see any war action, the ones that we're talking about, but they were basically ships that were used to fire mortar rounds onto like coastal defense forts. And generally we're following two ships in the stories in this book. We're following Erebus, the main one. I'm hoping I'm saying that right. Erebus. I'm gonna say Erebus. And the Terror. And we don't just follow the famous thing that happened. This is the search for the Northwest Passage, the John Franklin expedition. We also follow before that a trip to the South Pole, the Antarctic expedition by James Clark Ross. Sir James Clark Ross. Was it Ross or Clark? See, Clark Ross. I really enjoy this book. So I'm dressed up, and I'm dressed up this Harris tweeds from the Outer Hebrides, kind of the westernmost islands of Scotland. There is part of this book that takes place in another part of the islands that are on kind of the eastern side. Sammy, no. So I just wanted to wear it. I got it, for Christmas, and I like it a lot. It's my first tweed jacket, and it's a good kind of tweed. Okay, so we follow two expeditions, really. Although there are references to other expeditions, this is a time where the wars with Napoleon are over. There are going to be some other wars, like the Crimean War with Russia, eventually. But this is really a time where England... I don't know what that was. This is a time where England tries to really work on exploration, especially scientific discovery. This is post-Darwin on the Beagle. Not too far after Darwin, but we're looking at mid-1800s, which is an interesting time to look for England. We've got these two ships that are sturdy and big. They're big and chunky, kind of, because they need to have room for the ammunition, the cannonballs, the mortar balls, whatever, mortar rounds for these bomb ships. So they were made to carry a lot. And that translated into a pretty heavy ship that could be reinforced for Arctic or Antarctic operations. Wouldn't do great speed, 7 knots, but were consistent and hardy and could live, right? Erebus was 105 feet. which is crazy to me. I was on, in the Coast Guard, a 210-foot ship, right? So double. That's easy math. 210 is double of 105. We had 78 crew members and officers and multiple decks, and we would go out for months at a time. I look at this, and they probably have maybe a little less than half the crew, half the ship. And they're out for years and years and years, which is just crazy. So the first expedition that we really follow, the two ships, Erebus and Terror, have been converted into ships for basically exploration. They're basically one solid deck. They've kind of lobbed off higher decks and made it one, so it's easier to kind of maintain. It's more basic, but it's provided more ability for them to do scientific work, especially looking at the magnetism of the Earth and how they can better use that information for navigation. At this point, they're using the sun and celestial bodies, planets, which means that they have to have certain time of day, or they need to have a certain amount of clarity, good weather, to be able to find their position. If they can figure out how to calibrate magnetic North Pole, that would be great. So first trip they take, they're going to the south. They're looking for the continent of Antarctica. And the two people leading the way are, on one of the ships, James Clark Ross, and he's kind of the overall commander of it. He has prior experience. He screwed up earlier. No, maybe his uncle screwed up by thinking that they found land when it was actually clouds. That's a pretty big mess up. And Crozier, I forget I don't know how to say his name. I should have watched somebody else talk about this first. All right, so they're going down. They have a multi-year expedition that starts in 1838 or 1839. By the time they're back, it's early 1840s. And they're looking for different parts of the continent. They're trying to lay claim. Also doing magnetic studies. They're putting up observation posts for monitoring the magnetism. And they're working with other ships around the world to have something developed for navigation. They make some stops in Tasmania. Is another adventurer who is the lieutenant governor of the territory, and that is Sir John Franklin. He was also on earlier expeditions. He's known as the man who ate his shoes or his boots because they got snowed in an Arctic expedition. Ross had also been on an Arctic expedition. But so essentially what happens in this is a lot of danger with the elements. Snow, ice, weather. We're talking about the South Sea and the horrible ocean experience of sailing the South Sea. I have not done that. But it's supposed to be really rough because it's a lot of uninterrupted area for waves to really pick up, especially around the Cape Horn, the southern end of South America. So they're making these trips. They go to the Falklands, Tasmania. They find a couple islands off of the Arctic. They're trying to get to the South Magnetic Pole. They don't get there, but they do touch land. And they end up being the furthest south a ship has gone. And I think ended up being the furthest south a purely sailing ship has gone, because there are only sails at this point ever. They come back. It's a success, but it's kind of overshadowed. I think a lot of the attention to the world is on the Arctic and specifically the Northwest Passage. So they get back, and in rather short time, they decide there needs to be an expedition of the Northwest Passage, which still hasn't been found. Nobody's made it all the way through. And they're trying to pick captains for that. And one of the natural picks would have been James Clark Ross. He has declined to do that. He's got a new wife, and he's done. I think he's done. I think Antarctic trips are rough on people. Although they didn't really lose many people, they're rough. So they go with Sir John Franklin. His wife kind of lobbied for him, but he also has experience, and he's a little old. And that's one of the concerns. Also, they're kind of like trying to pass the torch. So there are people like James Fitzjames that they want to kind of take leadership roles, but he goes as second in command. Then we have Crozier, who's going as the commanding officer for Terror, and they're going to go to the Northwest Passage or try to find it. They have strict instructions from the Admiralty on where to go and where not to go, and they're leaving in, I think, 1845. And they add engines and propellers, but they're very underpowered. It's really, they think it's a good way of getting them through the ice if they can't use the wind on their sails. But they're also, it's like 25 or 50 horsepower, so it's not like it's going to be breaking ice, and it adds a lot of weight to the ship, and it takes some of the area that they can use for storage for this engine and kind of support of that. But they are I think it seems that they are well stocked. They're well supplied, kind of, with one exception, with the kind of food that they were supplied with and the way it was packaged. They went with the lowest bidder, and that may have been a bad thing. So you have that. And they kind of go around the north end of Great Britain, through where near the Shetlands are. I forgot what the name of it is. Head over towards Greenland, resupply there. They have a bit of an escort. Some of the newer steam-powered ships are helping them just in case they get into any storms early on, and also providing them some last-minute supplies. My dog is trying to bite my coat, which I'm not a big fan of. Sammy was kicked out because she was trying to attack my very cool coat. Jacket. So the last ship that's with them leaves, and they head off to Baffin Bay. They're looking for the Northwest Passage. It's 1845. The agreement is if they don't hear from them by 1847, they're going to send out a group to look for them. 1845. And some of the ways that they are able to tell people where they are is they drop almost like messages in a bottle, but I think they're actually in cans. And they just kind of put where they're going, what their intentions are, where they are at the time. They throw them out there, and then they just kind of drift, and hopefully someone will find them. And if they find them, there's a little message on the inside. It's written in like 6 languages. And the message is basically send this to the Admiralty in London so they have an updated position. They also would erect cairns, piles of rocks, and they would put messages in cairns. And it was also advised that they could leave boats certain places with supplies. So if they ever got snowed or iced in, they could travel over foot to those locations, and they would be supplied. So they're entering these different passages in the Northwest Passage. Now, when you look at a map, you're like, oh, they're very close. But these are 70 miles apart. Some of these, I think the closest is they're very wide. You can't see land when you're in the middle of this. Also, there's so much ice that you can't necessarily tell what is land and what is water, what is like ice on the sea versus on land. So they eventually kind of get stuck, and they decided it's too late in the year. They need to they need to winter over. They winter over on, I think it's Beachley Island, somewhere like that. They leave a message saying this is where we are. Things are going fine. We're in good spirits. They have plenty of food. They have food for years. And then when things start to thaw, they're going to move on. Well, this is a horrible year. This is a horrible period to be in the Arctic because it's colder than usual, and it's so cold that some places don't even break up. They're going to continuously have ice covering them. It's even a time where the local Inuits referred to as like the time where there was no something ice break. I don't know. So it's not a great time to be there. They didn't know that though, right? And then they go missing. Like no one's heard from them. There are reports from the local Eskimos, they call them, or Esquimaux, the way they spell it, Inuits, natives, and the reports are they've seen these ships. They've seen white man. Some of them were in bad shape. Some of them died. They traded things. Whatever. 1847 rolls around. They still haven't heard. Franklin's wife really starts pushing people to go look. Eventually, Ross goes and looks. Has to turn back. They commission like 5 different expeditions to look for the Franklin expedition. Can't find them. And then we get to 1850, 1851. They start to find traces. They find some English silverware. They find a medal that Franklin wore. They find debris, a lifeboat overturned, a few grave sites, but they're grave sites from earlier in the expedition, so they still believe there might be a chance of finding the crew or survivors. Because the grave site, they also found letters that basically said things were fine, and it was around the same time they buried the individuals, or it looked that way. They start finding others. They're still like, where's Franklin? We got to find this guy. And people are looking overland. They're also looking on the water. It's crazy because some of these expeditions end up losing ships too. They can't find the ships, but there are stories of bodies found that had skin pulled off of them, like they were eaten. And it looked like they were probably eaten by other humans, like they had cuts and saw cuts on bones. That kind of thing. Now, this is something that happens from time to time. We've heard about it in the past with the whaling ship that sunk and people having to resort to cannibalism in 1821. This is not a new phenomenon. It happens over and over again. It's part of survival, but it's also something that the general population doesn't want to think about or talk about. Years go by, and they find more and more, and eventually they find pretty straight evidence that Franklin died. Franklin died in, I think, 1847 or 48. Things really go south. Scurvy. Scurvy is horrible. I asked my dad, ER doctor, I asked him, have you ever seen scurvy? He hasn't. He's seen rickets, which is a deficiency of vitamin D, but scurvy is just really a deficiency of vitamin C. It's so easy to overcome. You just eat citrus fruits or vegetables. People didn't know that, so their gums would swell up, turn black, their teeth would fall out, their bodies would kind of like eat away at themselves. People would die of scurvy. People were dying of scurvy. The natives saw people that were experiencing scurvy-like injuries. And, it took another 100 years or so to find, in 2014 and 2016, the 2 wrecks, Erebus and Terror, were found. From further south than they thought they were going to be, there was some hypothesis that they probably headed south because of where the snow was and where the ice was, and there were some areas they didn't realize they thought were peninsulas, but they were actually islands. And a lot of this area wasn't discovered, wasn't really explored. So, we sit back and we're like, how do you not get around this? Even now, ships that are up there really have to plan ahead, and it's so isolated. Even now, they're reinforced hulls or they're ice-breaking hulls, and it's still fairly unpredictable, or it has been for years and years and years. They headed further south than people thought they were going to be. They also didn't use the Cairn system very well. And it looked like there were probably 2 groups that split up and tried to do a walk over the land using ships to carry things, or boats to carry things, sledges. And those groups either died or set back, and died too, because they were already, after 3 or 4 years, they're definitely experiencing scurvy. And even though they had all these supplies, there's a chance that some of the tin, or a lot of the tin used, was of a poor quality, and the food was of poor quality. They went with the lowest bidder. This company from Bulgaria or Hungary or something, and they were canning them in Moldova, and they think that it was leaching, I guess, lead into the food. So that may have made them sick, or at least hastened their decline. They all started dying off. The expedition died, but it was like, well, what happened? And they've narrowed that down more and more. They found the ships. At least when this was written, they weren't sure if there was anything on board that they could use logbook wise. If there was any kind of paper, there's a good chance that it was probably taken before the ships broke up. They didn't sink. They had to be abandoned because they were running out of food. They were getting sick. And the only option besides staying there and dying was going somewhere else to find a place, hopefully, or die, which they did. We're talking thousands of miles, too. They would have been walking for 1,200 miles. And those distances and time frames are crazy to me. To think that you're sitting in the same spot for years on 105 feet and trying to survive that. And then you're like, this is not going to be survivable. We need to march over 1,000 miles and navigate that in areas that people generally haven't been. And most of the people in these expeditions haven't been to. Overland. With a big heavy thing full of supplies. And sick people trying to pull it. Crazy. So there's a good chance there's no more evidence. It may have been the natives took while the ships were still afloat, but iced in, but abandoned. That they may have taken papers or thrown them away or used them or whatever, as they were kind of just picking apart the ships, because eventually that's what happened. Eventually they broke up because of the ice and they sank. And they were I think they were within 50 miles of each other, maybe. So they were pretty close together, 70 miles of each other. But they were much further south than people thought they would have been. There were definitely expeditions that came close to finding them, but I think the distances are just so great that it's really hard to imagine how far they had to search, and what a small little speck in that giant area they were looking for these two ships. And beyond the distances and the time frames, just the weather and the hazardous conditions, it's not a good chance. So that's kind of where we're left at. I really like the way Michael Palin writes this. He talks about the history, he goes into stuff, but he's also kind of retracing the path, and he's talking about what he finds when he's visiting these places like Hobart in Tasmania, or in the Falkland Islands off of Argentina. He's following it hundreds of years later, 150, 170 years later, and giving an impression of what he sees now, or when he was writing this, and kind of relating that to what it may have been like way back when. And a lot of these places are isolated enough that there probably hasn't been a lot of advancement, that you can kind of see some of the landscape that was there from 150, 170 years ago. So I really like the way he did that. Also, there are pictures in here. They do there's 2 sets of pictures, and they're on a different kind of paper, which I really like when people do that. So there's a dead guy. But I really like when they do that because it's color and it's quality. There's 2 sets of that. And there's also a lot of maps, and it's really nice to have those maps or charts, because you're reading about something and you're like, where is this happening? And they kind of show you, like, this is where they went. It has the dates and the stops, and so I really like the way they did that. I give us 5 stars. I really enjoyed it. This is not the first shipwreck but it wasn't like your typical shipwreck, right? They were iced in. They abandoned the ship before it was wrecked. And before this, I had read The Wager. The Wager was from 1740 something. I really thought it must have been around this time, but no, this is much more recent. 1840s, 1830s, 1840s, 1850s, and then now. I am going to be doing I'm going to read I'm going to read a book about the Endurance at some point in the future. And I'm also I got the Lego set for the Endurance. It hasn't been delivered yet. It's on back order. But when it's delivered, I'm going to do a vlog where I read and put together the ship at the same time. We'll see how that goes. But that's the plan, because I really do like this time period. I'm sorry, it's not even really, because it's 100 years apart. But the concept of sailing ships, traveling thousands of miles over years with small crews in inhospitable areas and just trying to survive against the elements, the sea, the weather, the winds, the ice. It's really interesting to me. So this, really interesting. And now what I want to do is I want to go back and watch the AMC series Terror, which is based off the Dan Simmons book. It's historical fiction, but now I want to go back and watch that because it kind of uses this situation to have this scary monster story. And in the end, I'm pretty sure everyone died on Erebus by probably 1850, 1851. So thanks for being here today. I will talk to you later. Have a good one. Bye.
Westward from the Davis Strait is there 'twas said to lie the sea route to the Orient, for which so many died, seeking gold and glory, leaving weathered, broken bones, and a long forgotten lonely cairn of stones. Ah, for just one time I would take the Northwest Passage to find the hand of Franklin reaching for the Beaufort Sea, tracing one warm line through a land so wide and savage, and make a Northwest Passage to the sea.